Hello and welcome to Supply Chain Africa News. My name is Wandabo Wanyama. Today we are delighted to host Yasmin Chandani, who is the CEO of inSupply Health, an independent public health advisory firm based in Nairobi. She is dedicated to improving people's access to essential health products and also services. inSupply Health draws an affiliation with global public health consulting firm known as JSI and a dynamic regional team to help clients design health system solutions for complex challenges and environments. She has practiced supply chain for over 20 years. You can imagine. So actually, Jasmin, 20 years, how is it?
It's great. I'm still challenged every single day, and I love what I do.
Okay. So who is Jasmin?
So a little bit about my journey, I think, is what you're looking for, right? So
Yes.
I'm Kenyan. I grew up in Nairobi, born and bred here. I was very fortunate to get a scholarship to go study in the US. So I did my undergraduate and my graduate degrees in the US. I got an MPH.
Okay.
But I always knew I wanted to come back home. You know, my heart was here, my family's here. So moved back. After graduate school, I got hired by JSI and started working in supply chains.
Okay.
It was completely by chance. I was interviewing with a number of different organizations, got a few different offers, and really what drew me to JSI was not supply chain as a topic, but the team and the people. It's a great team. And then when I started with them, I started working in supply chain and realized that I loved it. And it sort of brought out I'm by no means an engineer or a maths person, but supply chain gave me enough of that nerd feeling, and I really enjoyed it. And I was surrounded by lots of people who loved the same. So that's who I am. I worked in JSI's US office for many years, moved back to Kenya about 10 years ago with my family, and we started inSupply 3 years ago.
Okay. That's interesting. You have, even before we go into all those details, you have worked with a couple of companies. Tell us that journey up to where you are as the CEO. How has the journey been like?
So, being the CEO is probably the hardest thing I've ever done. It's not easy, but it's very rewarding. I would say I was always a very strong technical person, and so JSI gave me lots of opportunities. I worked in family planning, in HIV, especially in the early HIV years. I did a lot in supply chain, and I think I really strengthened my skills and experience. And then when I moved here, I was fortunate to be managing a child health project, supply chains for community case management. And that, I think, spoke to my heart. We had a great team. We were working for a great cause, reducing infant mortality and child mortality. And I think we did some really innovative stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think when the time came for inSupply, I, again, was offered the opportunity and decided that it was time to stretch out of my comfort zone and do something more meaningful than I had been doing up to date.
Yeah. What's that one thing that you wish someone could have told you before you joined the profession?
Yeah. It's actually not unique to supply chain. It's someone like myself. I actually am an introvert, and I love solving technical problems. I wish I had known earlier on how important the people part of supply chain is, and the relationship building for me as someone who wanted to make change and see and make an impact, but also within supply chains. I mean, supply chains are about people. They're not about, yes, the information is important, the processes are important, but fundamentally, it's the people who make it happen. And so I wish I'd known that a little earlier. I would have maybe done things a bit differently earlier in my career.
Okay, when you say maybe you could have done other things different, which are these things you feel like you could have done differently?
So I spent a lot of time, I think, solving problems on spreadsheets, for example, figuring out how do we quantify for ARVs? There's no data. It's a new program. There's so much at risk in terms of cost, right? But I think, and this is where I think we've translated this learning now, I wish I had spoken to the people on the front line more instead of working on a spreadsheet to try and solve that problem.
Okay.
So that's what we do now at inSupply. We use a technique called human-centered design, and we really try and understand the problem and then solve it together with the users and the people who are going to be most affected by that.
Okay, let's talk about inSupply, the organization that you're leading right now. What was the motive behind the formation of this company?
So it's a really interesting journey. JSI has a very decentralized model. And it's one that suits my personality and anyone who's stayed at JSI a long time. What it does is it allows you to solve problems closest to where the problem is, instead of having a centralized approach that doesn't work for every context. So there was already a strong foundation there. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation approached JSI and said, we really want to change the landscape of supply chain in East and Southern Africa. We want to invest in making sure there is strong organizations with talent. Would you consider a spin-off? Would you consider exploring the possibility of a local organization? And JSI had been already looking at local organizations. So when that discussion happened, the idea was, is there a viable market for something like what inSupply is today? The idea was not to create another donor-dependent organization, but something that could thrive in East Africa that offered value to both public and private clients. And so when the foundation asked this about JSI, JSI was open to this and asked me to lead the process because of my history with the organization, because of my supply chain background, and obviously because I was Kenyan and based here and committed to staying here. And initially, I think I was, it was really out of my comfort zone, being a CEO. But I eventually decided this is something I needed to embrace for my professional and personal growth and to make more of an impact. And so inSupply it's still very much, we're not a baby anymore, we're maybe a toddler. We're still learning how to walk. We stumble a lot. We're still in we're just starting our third year, in fact. But it's really great. I work with an amazing team of people. We have a lot of amazing supporters and partners. And what we're trying to do is change the way in which development and supply chains are designed and implemented. As I mentioned, we use human-centered design techniques so that we don't assume we know the best. We have a lot of supply chain expertise, but we don't always understand the context the best. We don't always understand the local issue that's the biggest barrier. So we co-create a lot. We look at sustainability from the start, and we really have an entrepreneurial spirit within our organization.
Yeah. How has the journey been like?
In terms of
the challenges that you're facing,
staffing is talent building is a really tough one. I think Kenya and East Africa generally, there's amazing talent, but it's also a very competitive environment, and we're trying to build something different. We're trying to do things differently and do different things. And so it means we're looking for a combination of skills that may not be easy to find in the market.
Okay.
And it's not just the skills, it's a mindset.
Okay.
It's a growth mindset, it's an entrepreneurial mindset, it's like a passion, and those things can be hard to find. We've got a really strong team right now, but we hope to grow and still attract and find more people, but we're also very committed to building talent. Talking
about staffing, most women do not take up the roles of being in supply chain. There are only about 37 to 38% of women in supply chain. What are the things that are causing women? Probably they are not being entertained, or they like the profession.
Well, I think it's that catch-22, the old catch-22, right? There aren't very many women, especially in leadership roles. So when young women are coming up, they don't have a lot of examples to look at and say, that's who I want to be like. That's someone who's
inspiring. And that's why people like you need to come out there so that other young women can see you.
Yes, and that's what I hope. Not only me, we have some amazing women leaders in our organization, and they too will be, because you as an individual, I can only reach one. I don't know how many people I can inspire and maybe connect with. But if you have layers upon layers of leaders and strong supply chain professionals and women who are passionate about it, that's one way to get people attracted to it. The other thing is to be deliberate, and that's the other thing inSupply is trying to do, is we actually look at gender balance a lot. In fact, there was one point where we had so many females, we said to ourselves, now we need to go the other way and make sure we're not discriminating against men. So we try and look for balance in everything, and we try very much and take an inclusive approach in not only with gender, but with age, with ethnic background, with everything we do. We think the best team is one that is more inclusive, rather than exclusive.
Yeah, you are a mother, you are a CEO, you are a wife, you are a sister, you are an eco warrior. How do you balance all this?
Yeah, it's really hard. And I think if people close to me hear me saying this, they're going to laugh because I don't balance it very well. But I think recently what I was inspired by was reading something that said, you know, balance for especially for everyone is hard with COVID, but especially for working moms, it's really hard, right? So rather than aiming for balance, which it's been my goal for 5 years and I've never really achieved balance. What I try now and do is focus on the idea of juggling balls. And I think of the balls as a glass ball, a rubber ball, maybe a plastic ball, a soft ball. And you think about right now in this moment, which is the glass ball that I cannot let shatter. The rest of them I can prioritize, but that glass ball has to keep me grounded. And like today, my glass ball might be my kids. Tomorrow, the glass ball might be a proposal. So if I can just figure out what that ball is and not let it fall and shatter, then I can let myself let the other balls bounce or sit until I'm ready to pick them up.
That's very interesting. There has always been a mantra that behind every successful man there is a woman. Who are these people who have been your biggest support system all along your journey?
Definitely my family. They're amazing. They always have been. And there's, you know, I travel a lot. And if it wasn't for them and my team at home who supports, I don't know how I would do it. So that's the number one. But I would say my colleagues at work are really supportive. And I have really great friends who are also in a similar position. You know, they're stretched very thin. So we encourage each other, we support each other. But because there's so many dimensions that you need support in. And I would definitely say, I don't have one person behind me. I have a whole team of people who support and lift me up.
Yeah. You grew up in an Indian home. Yeah. How has it shaped you?
It's a tough question because I don't know what the comparison is, right? Like I don't know, but I would say
because you know there is a notion that Indians are the best in terms of business and stuff.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Do you encounter also that stereotype or the
I get
pressure?
a lot of stereotypes. Yeah, I get a lot of stereotypes. Sadly, mostly with the police in Nairobi who love to stop me. But I would say it's true. We come from a very strong business community. And my parents actually ran a business. And when I was growing up, I had to work in the business every single holiday and all the time. And our life was controlled by the business. So when I was growing up, I wanted nothing to do with the business. It was a tourism business and it was very cyclical. So there'd be feast and famine. It would be stressful. You know, there'd be times my parents were worried about school fees. But what I didn't realize, and so I deliberately went for a job rather than working in the business. But now, ironically, I find myself running a business. And I realize now I learned so much from working in the business and hearing my parents talk about, you know, cost prices and cost control and all these things I didn't even realize I picked up on. So I think there's that in the background that helped. But, you know, in terms of not only am I Indian, I'm Muslim. I come from a really supportive family. In fact, one of the, you know, there's a stereotype that Muslim women are encouraged to marry early and those kinds of things. My family was not like that. I was encouraged to get my master's degree. If I had wanted a PhD, they would have loved that. And my dad was actually one of my biggest supporters. Even when a teacher would say, "Oh, she's not good at physics," he'd say, "You are. We're going to show them." He was a great cheerleader of mine. So,
are there any values you learned from your parents that you're still applying them in your business?
Absolutely. There's one that I don't, maybe two or three. I don't know how to phrase it. But that we don't compromise on it inSupply, and it's a personal principle, is ethics and integrity. Especially in this day and age, I think it's a non-negotiable for me. And you know, we haven't. My parents always drummed that into us. Is like that honesty, ethics, and integrity is critical. And I think whenever I'm in doubt, that's what I use my gut for that, and we go in that direction. Because I think if you can stay, and then of course there's things like kindness, compassion, giving back. There's a lot of other very important values that I've gotten from them. But I think, and valuing people, you know, those kinds of things are really important.
When you talk about honesty and integrity, it's one of the biggest challenges that, you know, it really cuts across the supply chain profession.
And it's something when building inSupply, I have a zero tolerance policy. And probably the first words that anyone who's been interviewed at inSupply has heard from me is about the importance and how we're built on that. So there's no room for anything. And, if that's not as important to you, then inSupply is not the place for you. But it is. It's such a worry. It's not only in supply chains. It's in the world we live in. It's in our country. There's so many worries about ethics and integrity right now. And I think we can't control what anyone else does. We can just control what we do and be an example maybe for the future.
Okay. You spend more than 5 years, leading the supply chains for community case management project. Could you kindly paint for us a picture? How was it like?
So it was my first time in a director role. And it ended up being one of the funnest things I ever did, because I had such a great team. And that team gets so many kudos for helping me learn and develop as a manager and a director. I didn't know, I was sort of dropped into that role with not a lot of background in what does a good project director look like. Of course, I could see examples, but no one taught me how to play that role. And it was, really, I was given the role because of my technical background and my supply chain, what I'd done in supply chain. And that's when I really realized, it's so important. That piece is important. I love it. That's what brings me alive. But the people piece of it and managing teams and helping them thrive, that's equally important. Yeah. It was a really interesting project. It was an implementation project in Malawi, Ethiopia, and Rwanda. So Kenya, I was just based here because of my family.
Yeah.
And that was a great opportunity that both JSI and the donor allowed me to be based here. But it ended up working really perfectly for our work because I could travel and fly a lot. And I think it laid the foundation for what we're doing on inSupply. It really pushed the boundaries of innovation, human-centeredness, and hearing from, it also built that sense of commitment to equity. And so some of the work we're doing now under inSupply really looks at, as health systems progress, how do you make sure you don't leave those most marginalized in communities behind? How do we do digital health with a view to inclusion and equity? So that, I think, was a really pivotal point in my career and how I hope to approach problems and provide solutions.
Okay, thank you. So we are going to take a short commercial break, and when we come back, you will tell us, as the CEO, what time do you wake up? So just stay put. When we come back, you will talk about that.